Hi, friends. Welcome tonight. I'm really excited to have Christa Lewis here. She is a voice actor for the book The Slow March of Light, and she narrated Luisa Vogt's point of view. And I probably said that wrong. You said it so beautifully in the book. But why don't you introduce yourself, Christa?
Yeah, hi, I'm Christa Lewis. I'm an audiobook narrator and voice actress, and I was blessed, really. I got asked to narrate Luisa in this co-narration with Stephen Graybell by Blackstone Audio. And I get asked once in a while to do World War II fiction and nonfiction because I am half German and I speak the language. I spent 20 years in Berlin. So this narration was a huge remember when, because when you live in Berlin, you actually live in the history. You don't, it's really not abstract.
Well, and tell us about that. I mean, I have a lot of questions for you, but why don't we talk about that first? Like you lived in Berlin, which is just amazing to me that you have this background already, and obviously you're fluent in German and you're half German. So tell us about how that experience kind of has influenced or affected you.
I think I'm just going to do a sweeping generalization. So my assumption, and then of
Mhm.
course I assumed everybody was like this, as an American in Berlin, I would look at the Germans around me, particularly the older generation, like my mom's generation, yeah, and I would wonder, what were you doing during the war?
Right.
Right? With this really kind of edgy question, and I'd be riding the train, the U-Bahn, or I'd be walking to work or biking to work, and I would just be looking around and, what were you doing during the war?
Mm-hmm.
And the day I stopped was the day I was on a train and I asked myself, who would I have been during that war? And I realized that, of course, of course, I hoped and wished and dreamed that I would have been a good person
Mm-hmm.
and I would have hidden people and I would have worked for what is good and right. But then I followed that up with another question. I wondered how frightened I would have been. What if
Mm-hmm.
I'd had babies and children? You know what I mean? Like I suddenly put myself in somebody's shoes on the street in a way, and I didn't know how to answer the question. I knew who I wish and hope I would be, but
Yeah.
no one knows the measure of your soul. You know what I mean? In a situation that is that terrifying. So I couldn't answer the question, so I stopped asking it of others around me. So when I narrate a book like yours or some of the other World War II books that I have
Mm-hmm.
been awarded, I I go in with an enormous amount of curiosity because I'm exploring it the same way I suspect you are as well.
Well, I think even when you read books that do have the villainous characters, or we read about the real life, we I mean, we do look deep inside ourselves and we wonder, what if I was in that situation, or what if I had that type of pressure, or the threat, or the bribe, or whatever it ended up being, or just that survival instinct. Like, what would you have done in different situations? And I think we don't know until we're in that situation ourselves.
I agree. And there was an enormous amount of very sophisticated propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not saying I just, I have now been privileged to experience so many facets of people raking through this extraordinary dark moment in the soul of humanity.
Yeah.
Um, and I also got to experience Germany's lighter sides as I worked in the news. So a little bit of my bio is that I was for 17 years a newsreader for Deutsche Welle Television, which is a news program that was created in German and then translated into English and then broadcast around the world. And it still is today. And
Wow.
it's called DW instead of Deutsche Welle Television, or it's gone through a few iterations. And um, I think you can still get it in the States, it goes to
Mm-hmm.
Australia and, all around the world. And I totally lost my train of thought, but I think I experienced Germany at its darkest now as an audiobook narrator, narrating stories about concentration camps and, for example, doing my prep and reading your
Mm-hmm.
whole book prepping for Luisa and reading Bob's story. But I also experienced Germany and Germans trying to heal
Yeah.
or struggling to come out from under the that excruciating, history, and they can't go anywhere. It's the bullet holes are still in the walls in Berlin. There are
Yeah.
streets in Berlin that they have left exactly the way they are, so that it's not abstract. You can put your fingers in the bullet holes for those last seconds of the war when those young kids and old men were trying to keep out the Russians and the Americans, and Berlin got bombed to rubble. And I just, I like everybody else, I'm sure I'm just as baffled as all of us are that this had to be bombed into the ground, that a
Right.
country had to be turned to absolute rubble. And I don't know that anybody knows how to really wrap their brains around it. So, following Bob's story, and as the narrator of Luisa, I mean, I can't speak for other narrators, but I know I certainly sort of live the moments they are in. Um, as a voice actor, I think that's, sort of the very least I can do is just kind of offer my humanity to the story and try to meet the author's intent. That's my goal. I don't always achieve it, I think, but I try. And then I go right back there, because I'm walking down the street, she's walking down, and I'm with her as she's making those decisions. And so grateful that I don't know, I feel like you did a miraculous thing, if I may. As in my interpretation, I know you didn't ask, but I feel like you created somebody who was sort of the antithesis to the darkness that he was fighting and walking into. And it was really interesting.
Well, for Luisa's character, when I asked Bob Inama, I said, were there any, the publisher wanted me to have a female counterpart to his character. And so I found out that he had been friends with a young lady that was that went to the same church he did in Frankfurt. And, but then because her father did not care for American soldiers, he knew the relationship wouldn't go anywhere. But I thought for the book purposes, I needed to have her still in the story. And so I was just amazed when I found this, all this information on West Berliners who were helping diligently for years and years East Berliners escape. And so I thought if I put her on that network, then that just kind of pays tribute to the people that were there for their own countrymen.
Yeah, it was very poignant.
Anyway, but I really appreciate, I love listening. I actually listened to the audiobook last week, driving around doing errands or whatever. And when I had interviewed Stephen Graybill last week, who had done the voice for Bob Inama, and he had mentioned that you were fluent in German, and so he was obviously getting some advice there. So and it was interesting to me because I thought, having a book dual narrated, you want to make sure that things are pronounced the same, or even just Bob's last name is pronounced the same, even though that's not a German name, it's technically Italian. But so I thought that was kind of an interesting process. So I'd love to hear about kind of the process you do preparing for a project, and also just to let all the listeners and watchers know is that you are in your recording booth, right?
Well, I'm right outside it. I'm outside because, every now and then you just have to get out of the box.
Right.
But yes, it is. And the twinkle lights, and they're just really, my 12-year-old way of just cheering myself up from spending a lot of time inside a box. But as far as process goes, it's you read the book. People actually ask. That's funnily enough a question everybody asks.
Mm-hmm.
You have to read the book, and you're like, yeah, because on page 397,
Right.
the lead character will suddenly have a Russian or French accent, and you're like, had I only known.
Yeah, did a lot of work now, and now you have to start over.
Right, exactly. So you read the book, and because it's a dual narration, you share your notes with the other narrator. And because I knew Stephen, or I suspected Stephen didn't speak German. I mean, he may. I honestly, we're acquaintances, right? But we're not super tight. And so I just recorded
Mhm.
the list that the publisher had sent us, because the publisher had done a so sometimes with books that are traditionally published, the publisher will prepare the book in advance for their narrators, and they create a list of foreign language words and anything that seems very complicated, and then they put the pronunciation next to that. And so I just hit record on my phone and I just said them out loud so that Stephen didn't have to like skate around all over the internet, and in case, he wanted to hear
Right.
them and not just read them. And that was useful. And they also sent me a YouTube link so that I didn't get Bob's name wrong. Um,
Mhm.
because I have sometimes normal words in the English language, because I spent 20 years in Berlin working for Deutsche Welle TV. I just say them wrong. I say normal English words wrong because I've got the European thing going on in my brain. And so you read the book and you look up the words that you just absolutely don't know. And if debacle or debacle and awry and awry
Mhm.
are anywhere in the book, I have to look it up 8 times because I can't get it in my head right. And then I don't know how other narrators work, but then I kind of just I follow the movie in my mind, and I try to understand the journey of the characters,
Mhm.
who they are at the beginning of the story and who they are what they go through and who they are at the end. And so, for example, for The Slow March of Light, because the history is so huge,
Mhm.
and I understood there were three. I don't know if three is right, but so there's an enormous there are main threads here. So the
Mhm.
threads are the faith, Bob's faith, and faith in general, right? So
Right.
his personal religious grounding and what brought him through, and his journey with that, hers as well, how she got closer, I think somehow, or she sort of
Mhm.
oriented herself in prayer at some point. And I try to think about it, what that means. And I try to think about where it starts and where it goes and where it ends. And because I believe that she starts the story as one version of herself,
Mhm.
and all the things that she undergoes, she becomes this other version. And all the things that he underwent, he certainly became somebody else, right? With all the things
Right.
that he went through. And then I try to think about the historical context. And obviously, you can't act or perform,
Mhm.
all those threads. But what you can do is pay attention to the language. So that is what I do. I just figuratively strap myself in and I listen to the author.
Mhm.
People think as a voice actor, we're all about our voices and stuff, which we are, a little
Mhm.
bit. But really, I've become a listener, and I'm trying to understand why the author is choosing certain words and certain metaphors and what they mean to the whole story. And
Mhm.
again, I know a little bit about the history, so I try to keep it in context. And then I know all I can do is my best and just be her as authentically as possible. So I just become her in a
Yeah.
way.
Well, it's an interesting experience as an author to listen to an audio rendition of a book we've written, and part of it, well, the very first time I started listening to an audiobook in my first book, I was kind of cringing because I was like, it just I was seeing and hearing all my double words or phrases. I thought, oh, I should have transposed that, or I said smile too many times in the same page, or but then I thought, if I when once you get past that and really just listen to the story being told by someone else and being acted by someone else, it really does bring the characters to life, and it kind of is how I feel like when I'm reading someone else's book. When I read someone else's book, I can become so immersed. But when
Yeah.
I'm reading my own, you're just focused on the editing side. So that's why it really is a gift to authors to have voice actors read, do these narrations and these audios, because it brings it to life in a way that that we can't ourselves.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I can't even imagine the processes you go through to weave all those things
Mhm.
together. And I'm sure you, like in my virtual imagination, you have like an outline and you have kind of a goal and you just hope you get there somehow.
Yeah.
You just go for it.
Lots of hope is definitely involved.
Yes, well, that's kind of what we do
Yes.
too, you know? You just kind of go, okay, and
Yeah.
just open your mouth and go. Yeah.
So tell us how you started or you became interested in being a voice actor and what kind of training you went under.
Um, I was I attended Boston University for 4 years as a theater major, and but really it was a by default. You know, everybody and went in as a liberal arts major, and everybody on my hall was a theater major, and so I applied to the School of Journalism, and I applied to the School of to theater at BU, and I was assuming the gods would make the decision for me, and they didn't. And so the first person I happened to tell that I got into both was an actor, and he jumped up and down, and I went, okay, and I jumped up and down. So I was like, okay, I'm going into the acting school. So that really, that's embarrassing but true. And then after 4 years of an acting training, you know, I was just at loose ends, and my
Mhm.
mom, it was going to be my grandmother's birthday in Germany, you know, a big one, 80.
Mhm.
It was a really
Wow.
big number for Germans, or 70, I can't remember, but it was a big birthday.
Mhm.
So off we went to Germany, and I don't know what happened. It was literally something happened when I got off that plane, and I just understood I was going to stay. It was just a deep intuition. And I did. I ended up getting a job at as a props person at Phantom of the Opera, which was they were doing something brand new. You know, we're so used to Broadway and buses and
Mhm.
tours and people booking a hotel and having a wonderful time in New York City and doing that kind of stuff. I mean, spendy but fun. And in Germany, they had never done that. They were just starting this model of kind of,
Mhm.
you know, show tourism. So I got a job at Phantom, and I did that for a year and a half, and then I got a little antsy because I understood, you know, props
Mhm.
had like 8 left thumbs. And
Right.
they were just nice about it and put up with me because I wasn't a quitter. So I couldn't always fix the elephant on Phantom, but I didn't give up. And I'd show up covered in glue and paint and feathers, and I'd be like, I tried. You have to check though, because it might be a mess. So they would always check.
Yeah. Wow.
They would always check. And then I met a voice actor, an American expat in Hamburg. That's where Phantom was, and most of my German family. And he got me a gig as a voice actor. Now, he had never asked me if I had any experience at the microphone at all.
Right.
And, you know, my dad was kind of a, I can do anything. So I kind of
Right.
essentially had that. I'm sure I can. How hard could it be?
Right.
They shipped me down to Düsseldorf or Köln or wherever it was. I think it was Düsseldorf, these poor people in the studio. And I walked in to do a 28-minute lip sync. So that means I was over voicing somebody on camera and I had to match their lip movements.
Wow.
Yes. 14 hours
Oh my
later,
gosh.
the editor was suicidal. The producer wanted to kill me, wanted to kill the guy who had hired me and brought me in. Everybody was very unhappy. I was devastated because this was hard work
Mhm.
and I had never done it before. So that was a big lesson. Anyway, by the time I got back to Hamburg, I was determined to at least never fail like that again.
Mhm.
And after that, it slowly but surely, I moved to Berlin because this company, they were doing more of this crazy theater tourism in Berlin. And then at some point, I left them and I got a job at Deutsche Welle TV because a friend, I was about to give up and go back to America. And a friend said, oh, Deutsche Welle television just went 24 hours. They need American voices.
Hmm.
I had my 14 hours of pain experience. So I was like, oh, I can do that. I can do that. I think I can do that. So I asked the person who told me about it, I was like, how do I do that? She said, it's just the news. Sound like you know what you're talking about. And I was like, I can do that. So I went into Deutsche Welle TV. I got an interview. And back in the day at Deutsche Welle television, there were glass walls to the studio, so you could watch and hear the people at the microphone.
Wow.
And my then boss read the news. Wah, 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 wah. He sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher. And so I was like, I'll do that. So I
Wow.
went into the booth and I went, wah, 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 wah. And he looked around. He was like, oh, I like that. And I was like, that's because I sound like you. And so I got hired.
Well, good. That means you're a true voice actor. Voice
Or
mimic.
an elevated parrot.
Yes.
Really. And then that's when my training began after I got that job. I mean, I had the acting training, but I learned from my colleagues were, they were in the armed forces. They were Voice of America broadcasting. They were fantastic. So I spent 2 years just listening and learning from my colleagues. And at some point I began to develop my own style. And here we are 27 million years later. And now I do audiobooks most of the time. Yeah.
That is awesome. I'd love to hear just about kind of your process of preparing to, well, you said you read the whole book. So what does kind of a day in the studio or a week in the studio look like for you?
I was just telling a friend the other day, I said, it goes from abject terror, like, do I have any books? Are there any more books to do? To being completely overwhelmed because somebody, so Blackstone reaches out to me and says, Christa, we have a book for you. And then they either tell you you have to do an audition because the author has approval, or they're just going to submit you. Do you have time during these recording dates? And I look at my calendar and I'm like, yes, I have time. So I can't remember how it went with The Slow March of Light. But they submitted me and then I was awarded the title. And then you read the book and then you get in there, hopefully on a regular kind of schedule, but freelance plus pandemic, plus I have 2 cats and I just moved. So it's all a little bit, but, I get into the booth and I've read the book and I pull up my recording software and I take a breath and I just try to, when I read a book, and it's exactly like what you're talking about when you hear the book or hear somebody else's book, I pay attention to the movie that was in my mind and I begin recording. And so I think my part was about 5 hours. I can't remember, 5 or 6 hours or 4 hours of the full total narration, shared with Stephen, I think, right? It was like a 10-hour, 11-hour.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And you'd be amazed at how hard it is to do a full hour of audio. So it takes about 2 to 3 hours of work in the booth to create that one finished hour of audio. And depending on the complexity of the material, or if you have to stop and catch your breath because you're emotionally invested and you don't want to like overwhelm the story with my own interpretation. You want to let the authors, you have to, it's a fine line to perform it, but also to make sure you're on track so that what you're performing is actually working with the story overall. So I would say for a 5-hour finished audio, it takes about 15 hours of work in the booth. And then you upload it to the publisher via a FTP server or Dropbox or whatever it is they're working with. Blackstone works with an FTP server. And then you wait for corrections because they, somebody listens to the whole thing and they send you any mistakes you may have made. You record those and then you send them back up. And then in the meantime, you're like, I need more work. Just the book. I got to do another book to keep the lights on. So it's essentially 2 full-time jobs. You're doing the recording and you're also trying to generate the next project.
Well, and so I'm curious, like, because when I go to like a writer's conference or I do like, teach some classes, a few in a row, I feel like my voice gets so tired. And do you have like where you only record a couple hours because you get voice fatigue, or how does that work?
All right. Well, I hear you, and
you get sick. I know that much.
You get sick, right? So the first thing you do as a voice actor is you find out where the nearest ear, nose, and throat doctor is, and you establish a long and trusting relationship with your ENT
Yeah.
nearby. And I think then for the rest, I think if you ask 10 voice actors, you're going to get 7,000 magic potions.
Mhm.
Oh, I do turmeric and lemon, ugh.
Mhm.
Or I do hot honey and. So I think I'm a bad person to ask because I've just been doing it so long that I don't warm up. My warm up is walking into the booth. There are narrators who are, they're just golden children. They warm up for half an hour, they sing, they do their exercises. I'm like, but I've been at it for a while, so
Right.
I'm kind of always in the space.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that goes on with it, so for example, my hacks for my throat are if I'm sore and scratchy, I drink ice water because I use something cold to bring down the inflammation. If I have botched my deadlines and I'm behind and I just have to keep going, even though I also get sore, what happens though for me is my brain gives out before my throat does.
Mhm.
So at some point, I'm just reading words backwards. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? I can't
Right.
make meaning anymore because I'm just too tired. And that's called hitting the wall. And, we all have that in various forms. But essentially, I have a big tub of lemon sherbet in the freezer for those days where I'm like,
Right.
ice it down, Chris, just ice it down and keep going. Just ice it down. It is not romantic. Other voice actors use steam,
Mhm.
right? They use steam. And when all else fails, you just have to close your mouth and just
Take a
shut it
breath.
all down. Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't take a lot of stuff. Like my ear, nose, and throat doctor once said, okay, it's a little bit of post-nasal drip, all that gumpy stuff.
Mhm.
So he gave me quercetin to dry it all up. And I'm like, 2 quercetins, 2 tablespoons of
Mhm.
sherbet, and I'm back in the saddle.
Yeah.
But yes, we do get tired. So if you have to do one off huge speaking, like big 8 hours and you're hello and hydrate, 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 get one of those Vicks steamers,
Mhm.
steam at night, and then ice cream.
Yeah.
The ice cream or sherbet. I mean, ice cream has dairy, so that's why I pick sherbet, which is no dairy.
Yeah.
Dairy kind of gets you kind of sticky and goopy back there, which is very
Yeah.
gross but true. And people are like, oh, green apples. If I see another green apple, honestly, Pete, I am just going to jump off the balcony. I could just, no, it doesn't work for me. So I eat clementines in the booth to keep
Yeah.
everything and drink water. I mean,
Mhm.
that's it. I keep it really simple.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing that. It's so interesting. Um, so do you have any current projects or upcoming projects that you're excited about?
Every one of them is, I mean, I know I seem a little bit callous and flippant. I'm really not. I mean, they're like my kids, in a
Yeah.
way, because you send them into the world and you just hope for the best. But um, I right after the Slow March of Light, it was so interesting. I got to narrate a book called Prevail Until the Bitter End by Alexandra Lose, who is a senior fellow. I'm going to get this wrong, so my apologies to Dr. Lose. But she's a senior fellow at the American Holocaust Museum, and her research was into we all want to understand how an entire country could have contributed to the
Right.
Holocaust. And essentially, her premise, this is a nonfiction book, her premise was to investigate what total war meant to the average German living at home. And what she uncovered, because the German government has just released, or over the past few years, there's been a huge release of documents from when they were interrogating German prisoners of war. So they would interrogate them, the Brits would interrogate them and send them back to their cells, and then they would mic their cells. So these were recordings and transcripts. So here you had for the very first time, or I read for the very first time, these prisoners of war talking amongst themselves
Wow.
after interrogation. So that was quite fascinating. And she made a very powerful case for the fact that the propaganda meant that every German, every Joe and Jane normal on the street was as invested as every soldier on the front, because the people running the war, the Nazis, made quite sure that everybody knew there was a home front
Mhm.
and a fighting front, which is where your husband, your brother, your son was at. And so they got all their information from those
Right.
fighting the war. It was fascinating. So having, worked through the Slow March of Light and then narrating that book, that was really interesting. I'm very grateful I got to do that. And right now I'm, lyrical fiction or cozy mysteries. So I'm a cozy mystery addict because they kind
Fun.
of, yeah, they are. They're a lot of fun. And, after you kind of wade through the darkness, the abyss of
Mhm.
human soul, and you end up wondering, like, about us all. Then there's a good cozy mystery. And I just learned I got to do the M.L. Longworth, Mary Lou Longworth does the Valac and Bonnet mystery series. It's based in Provence. If you're a foodie and you like French wine and stuff
Oh,
like
fun. Yeah.
that, and now it's going onto TV, and I'm like,
Oh, that's really cool. That's really
it's
cool.
really exciting. So that's my French accent. People hire me for my German, but I can I can bust out my French.
Yeah, and I'd like to hear more about like the different languages that you're either fluent with or very well versed in accents, and if that's just something that's kind of natural to you, or if you have to kind of practice your French accent before you do a book.
Of course. I mean, every narrator that, all my colleagues, some of
Mm-hmm.
them are absolute, they're just genius at accents. There are some narrators who are just infamously famous and
Mm-hmm.
well deservedly so because they can do 100 or 50, and you just like Greek, do Greek. And so they
Right.
do French, do Irish, do Scottish. And there are a couple that I just cannot do. I cannot do Australian. And I was telling one of my authors, my indie authors, I was like, I can't do Australian. She wrote an Australian into the book. And I'm like, I love you. So what you do is you have to study, right? You either
Yeah.
get a coach or you listen for hours on end, or I go to Netflix, like Scottish. I watched Shetland to get a
Yeah.
glottal stop. I watched, hours of this noir thriller on the
Mm-hmm.
Hebrides, the Outer Hebrides, so I could, you know, swear at people in Scottish and swallow my teas. And I was like, oh, I did it! I did it! I did it! I can do the book.
Yeah.
So I don't know how other narrators do it. I think they do their homework more than I do, but I just have been at it for so long
Mm-hmm.
that I have a wildly outsized estimation of my capabilities. So when I come up against something I don't know how to do, I'm like, and I'll go to YouTube for 8 minutes and I'm like, that is just not going to do. This is terrible. And then I actually go do my homework.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I've been curious because I am not, I mean, even if I practice, I took French all through high school and college and I still can't speak any of it.
Oh,
Um, but sometimes if they're, I can usually pick up French words like when I read them, but the spoken is and hearing is so beyond like scope of what I think I could ever accomplish. I don't know. So
I
it's impressive that voice actors, they a lot, all of them, it seems like, just have this kind of inborn talent, and obviously you have to practice and research, but it's also definitely a talent.
maybe. I don't disagree with you. I know,
Mhm.
but I also know because in Germany sometimes people would be hesitant to speak English with me because they would be shy about their pronunciation
Yeah.
and they thought they had really heavy accents. And I think some of it is just faith and muscling through.
Yeah.
And every voice actor I know is like just trying to keep the lights on, keep that work coming
Mhm.
in. So we have a very high incentive to figure it out.
Yeah.
And if it were me and somebody said, well, you're going to Romania tomorrow, and I'd be like, oh, how do you say hello in Romanian? I mean, what do they even speak there? And then I would stumble through it just like everybody else. There are languages I just don't hear in my head and just don't speak. But I bet you if you went to France or listen to so this is what I always tell people,
Yeah.
just listen to a book in that language and just follow along.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
There's a musicality. Oddly, it's the music and the cadence,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the Germans put the point at the end of the sentence. So that's why German sounds so weird to us, because they go really straight and flat. We go, hi, how are you? Right? We're like, woo, woo. And the Germans go, hallo, wie geht's? And it's just like, wunk. And they land. They land the plane at the end of every sentence. And we're like, nah, we float around on the clouds. We're like, oh, it was such a great day. Right? We go up and down and we're really musical. And the French, it does not matter how well you speak it. Somebody there is going to be like, speak in English because your French is terrible. Not all of them, but
right. But yeah,
it will happen.
yeah, I know. It's funny because that's probably, maybe I picked the wrong language to learn first. Is I should have picked one that was maybe less musical. And maybe I did actually take a year of German, and my brother lived in Germany a couple years, and so did my niece. But I still, so hearing you speak it, it's really fun to hear it. But I don't know if I would dare speak it aloud.
Oh, you got to just try. You got to just
You're
try.
probably right. You're probably right.
Plus, in Paris, even if the French are humiliating you at every turn, you look up and there's the Eiffel Tower, or you look down and there's
Right.
Poisson, and you're like,
You're still in France. It's okay. You're still in Paris. It's okay. So it's been so great to talk to you, and I really appreciate you coming on. So I just, we do have some comments, but I thought maybe later we can go back and answer them. They're just mostly highs and welcomes and thank yous. And they agree that they like cozy mysteries too. So that's fun to hear. But yeah, so thank you so much. And I hope you have a great evening and a great week. And I look forward to hearing more of your narrations as well. And thanks to everybody watching and listening.
Bye.